Okay, hey everybody, it's me, Buster Green, and I am going to answer some frequently asked questions today because quite a few people have asked me the same question enough that I feel like I can do it in the video. So the biggest question that I'm getting asked lately is what the hell is going on with the anime? So yeah, if you didn't see it, I made an anime a few months ago, and on YouTube, the current posted version is episode 1, version 1.2. Now, after 1.2, I didn't really get the hits I wanted. I got some more feedback from some more people, and I made another updated version called 1.3. However, I did not put 1.3 on YouTube because I felt like there wasn't a good time to do it, and there really wasn't a point. Instead, 1.3 went onto a random film festival circuit across the world to see if I can get any more hype and any more funding to finish the rest of the season by going through the traditional channels. So after the film festival run is concluded, or when the time is right, or when episode 2 is finished, I will eventually upload version 1.3 to the channel. I'm just not ready to right now because I don't feel like it. And on that note, as far as episode 2 is concerned, episode 2 right now is about 24% finished because certain staff finished their work on episode 1, and then I immediately moved them on to episode 2 while they were still employed by me. However, the major problem right now is that episode 1 completely bankrupted me and put me in debt. And then at the same time that happened, my job laid me off. And yeah, it was bad times this winter. So because of all that, I had to close down my animation studio. But hopefully everyone's going to come back when I eventually reopen it. On the bright side, I recently paid off all my debt, so now I just have to get some more money together to pay the staff when I do reopen the studio. Right now, I'm planning to reopen the studio in the summer because I'm hoping I'll have enough money to do it by then. I need to keep my job going. I need to hopefully not lose my job again. And I also plan on taking a vacation this summer, so once all that is settled, I will hopefully reopen the studio. To finish season 1 of Mutant Busters, we need to make 6 total episodes. These episodes are basically in the can. I just need to finish the animation on them. And this is seriously the only thing I need to do before I die. As long as I'm still living and breathing, I will keep working on it. And if I can, I would like to finish adapting the whole comic eventually when I get around to it. To finish the comic's entire arc and the additional epilogue arc I want to add, I probably need to produce about 4 seasons of anime with an uncertain amount of episodes, but hopefully when we're done, there'll be at least 25 episodes minimum. Anyway, so yeah, that's what's going on with the anime. Question 2, what about your other YouTube videos? What's going on with that? Yeah, so that's another uncertain issue. So right now, my YouTube channel has hit a steady subscriber view count balance where I'm earning about 20 cents a day, which comes out to about $6 a month, as long as I keep that up. Now, $6 a month is really not enough to afford a sandwich. And since I've only been monetized since July, I also haven't been able to cash that out so far. But hopefully, if I keep making videos, hopefully that number will keep going up. Now, previously, I'd stated that I planned on doing some more interesting highbrow content, and the anime is mostly that. But what if I did some other shit? Now, for example, I could make more episodes of 8-Bit Bastards. I made 3 episodes of that. Episode 1 got almost 20,000 hits. But then the other 2 episodes barely got watched at all. So, I don't know. Maybe I should have just made Mega Man cartoons. I don't know. Doing the animation work is always time consuming. Plus, I haven't done that in a few years. So hopefully my NES development kit is still working. It's been mothballed in the closet for years. Anyway, aside from 8-bit videos, I thought about breaking out and doing some random parody videos, like Mad TV kind of stuff or something, but I don't know. I have some Sonic DBZ Batman videos I could throw out, but I'm kind of torn about how much effort to put into them and whether or not that effort will actually be worth it, especially if I can't monetize them because I end up accidentally using copyrighted shit. Then I'm really depressed and blah about it all. Bat and the Sun gets away releasing their own Batman movies. Batman should be public domain in 10 years, but yeah, what if I just put 100% of my effort into making my own Batman movie? Or maybe even just an audio comic? Will Warner Brothers sue me? Will David Zaslav sue me? Will I get demonetized? I don't know. I kind of want to make Batman versus Pepsi Man. This is the shit I'm considering. But nonetheless, it's not worth it if I'm going to get sued. So yeah, anyway. I also considered that if I do reopen my anime studio later, I could have my assistants help me on the parody videos, and then I could probably knock them out in a few days instead of a few months. So maybe they're still worth trying, but maybe not. I continue to think about it and to think about the logistics of it all. Oh, yeah. And I was working on a kind of serious robot documentary. I got kind of far into it, but then it kind of didn't work out for me. So I kind of shelved it, and I feel like I need to like reboot it and redo it later. It needs more content, and I kind of need to figure out a different approach to it because right now it feels like I just made an NHK documentary, and I'm not proud of that at all. Oh, and I know I haven't reviewed any anime in a minute. Nothing's really come to me that's been like super critical to do. I'll definitely review Gundam Seed Freedom this year whenever I see it. And I also have some high concept reviews of Gundam Narrative and Magical Destroyers coming out whenever the hell I can get around to finishing them. And okay, so that is all of my frequently asked questions. That took a whole 5 minutes. So now, to kill some additional time, I'll honestly answer a series of separate frequently asked questions given to a popular Japanese celebrity, because if I answer his questions, I will surely have my own answers that are completely different. Question 1. Do you like camping? No, I do not like camping. I have not been camping in several years. I guess I like taking hikes, but not really camping. It's not really my thing. If I had to go camping again, it wouldn't be voluntary. The last time I went camping, it was just because I was hiking up a mountain and I kind of got stuck there overnight. 2. What was the most difficult thing about living in Japan? Mostly the poverty. I had a couple of situations where I had employers who would rent me an apartment, but then the apartment they rented me was too outrageous in the rent situation, especially for what those employers were paying me. Like sometimes the rent situation was like half my paycheck, and sometimes the apartment they gave me wasn't even close to my job. I became more used to this, so on my third job in Japan, I rented my own apartment in Tokyo, and I had a great place right behind Shinjuku Tower. It was so much cheaper and so much better as a result. But Japan is straight up the most expensive place I've ever lived in the world. And that regular expensiveness made just day-to-day life extremely difficult. There was also an irony that I came to eventually realize that because of the price points of Japanese things in Japan, it's actually way easier to enjoy Japanese things I like in America, where I can get them cheaper than they are in Japan, ironically. Number 3, is there anything you miss from back home that you can't get in Japan that would make you consider leaving? So I've actually contemplated this a lot, and back in the day, I wrote a very long list of things I missed about America. I'm pretty sure the top 3 things on that list were queso, clam chowder, and meatballs. Now, I don't eat queso like I used to anymore, so that's like definitely not a major priority anymore. But figuring out restaurant quality clam chowder has been one of the biggest personal struggles of my life, and has just taken me years to figure out. Apparently, the big secret ingredient was half and half creamer. Go figure. And then meatballs. Yeah, meatballs are also a problem. I finally figured out how to fully make meatballs during the pandemic. Now, when I lived in Korea, I could get these little otogi meatballs from like Home Plus, and they were basically identical to the meatballs you would find in like a can of SpaghettiOs. Not particularly tasty, but better than nothing. But in Japan, just no one knew what a meatball was. No one understood meatballs, and that drove me nuts. Yeah, in general, it was kind of hard to get certain food elements in Japan. I remember one summer I made a pretty decent Philly cheesesteak from scratch, and I was pretty proud of that. Now, flipping the question back around, now that I've left Japan, is there anything I severely miss? The biggest thing I probably miss out of Japan was just soda. Soda was just so much better in Japan. They had like chocolate soda, and you don't know what I would kill for a Pepsi Sapote Gold again, man. Like recently the US introduced Mango Pepsi. It's all right, but it's nowhere close to as good as Pepsi Sapote Gold was. Question 5. How do you feel about Japan's obsession with lottery systems? And do you know if Japanese people actually appreciate them? Okay, so I think Japanese lottery systems totally suck. They border somewhere between being exploitative scams and completely useless for all the people involved. So I'm kind of only familiar with 2 of these systems that I've seen, the one for concerts and the one for the grocery store. So for concerts, like the lottery majorly sucks and is totally a scam. Like in America or literally any other decent country, concert tickets are just sold like movie tickets. It's first come, first serve. And if the movie sells out, you just go to the next one. Or in this case, if the concert sells out, maybe it's playing in another city with less people, or maybe you're just out of luck. Or if the concert venue sees that the demand is high enough, they will put on a second show. And now everyone gets to go, and I think that's an absolutely fair system. Now, let's go to the Japan system. Now, the way I understand it, and bear with me because I might have some of these details wrong. So, like, if there's a concert at Tokyo Dome and a million people want to go to it, it's not first come, first serve. It's fully based on a lottery. And if a million people enter that lottery and Tokyo Dome can only hold 100,000 people, 100,000 people will win the lottery. But then the 900,000 people who don't, just they lose their money. And I don't know where that money goes. Now, I believe somehow this balances out. Like maybe the lottery tickets in Japan are cheaper than the definitive tickets in the US. I mean, they got it because of Ticketmaster, but I still feel like the 900,000 people who bought the lottery tickets and didn't win, they just got scammed. So I really don't know what to think of all this. I don't know where the money goes. Does it go to Tokyo Dome? Does it go to the band playing? Does the band playing know that 900,000 people didn't get to see them? So do they do another show due to demand? In general, I just don't think the system is good for anyone. And I fully don't understand what they're doing with it, aside from scamming people and taking their money from the losers. Now, as far as Japanese people are concerned about this, I really haven't asked any of my Japanese friends about it. I would just assume that a majority of people just accept it because it's a part of modern life and they haven't really thought deeply about an alternative. That's kind of a thing that happens a lot in Japan. Or, you know, maybe they're just not familiar that the international model exists, because if they knew about it, like it's obviously better for both the business and the consumer. So that's like so just there and not being utilized. I don't know. That's kind of common for a lot of stuff in Japan. It's just not the same as the rest of the world because Japan kind of likes to bubble itself and not pay attention to what the rest of the world is doing. But I feel like a lot of times Japan is losing out by not knowing about this stuff and not knowing that their version is kind of worse. Oh, and shit, I didn't even start to talk about the grocery store lottery system. All right, so sometimes if you spend enough money at the grocery store, you'll get a lottery ticket. Like sometimes this ends up being like mirrored in video games. I also once saw an anime where a girl won a trip at a grocery store lottery to the onsen, but in real life, I never saw anything that good or that cool. Like, I feel like the best thing I ever saw at my grocery store, the top prize was like a collection of spam, like a spam gift set, something really lame like that. Either way, I never won anything except for like coupons to get money off of really expensive shit I would never buy, like an air conditioner, something that was just too expensive to ever like casually buy. Number 6, how is your Japanese language proficiency these days? In a single word, it's rusty. I haven't seriously practiced Japanese since I left Japan. I would say that my Japanese listening skills have probably continued to grow, and I've definitely reached the level where I can understand most Japanese spoken to me very decently, and I can also sometimes even follow anime without looking at it, but I still can't read hiragana. I can read katakana, but I also haven't outwardly spoken Japanese in years. I would probably do it if I had like a reason to, and maybe hopefully I do go back to practicing and my skills go back up. Maybe it'll happen, but at this time, I have no clue when it will. Number 7, how often do you get to learn / practice Japanese when you're not working on content? Yeah, okay, so this is more of the same. Like, I haven't had a good situation to practice Japanese in a while. Most of my Japanese friends in the US eventually moved back to Japan. Now, we stay connected, but usually when we do reach out to each other, we usually speak in English. I haven't made a ton of new friends either since the pandemic, but I used to practice a lot of my Japanese through gaming, especially back in the PS2, PS3 era. Honestly, I learned a lot of my basic Japanese just from trudging through Super Robot Wars MX. I guess I still have a tendency to play a lot of Japanese games when they're set in Japan with the Japanese audio turned on, but it's been a long time since I imported a game or I ran into a game that just straight up didn't have full English subs nowadays, because I feel like Japan is being a little bit more mindful of international culture when it comes to gaming. Number 8, what aspects of Japanese culture do you appreciate after having gotten used to it? / what aspects of your own culture do you miss? Okay, well, I guess in general, Japanese people are a lot more honest than Americans in a way I really appreciate and really love. Like sometimes in America, people will just dick around too much and that pisses me off. But at the same time, I feel that because of that honesty, a lot of people can be more harsh towards others. But then again, the whole world kind of seems to be moving towards that harshness lately, with more conflicts springing up around the world lately. So maybe that's just the way it is everywhere. Back to Japan. Japan also has this like weird overemphasis lately on like trying to solve bullying with children lately. And I really don't think that is something that's actually solvable, because even if people learn to be more respectful than others, I think deep down inside, they'll always secretly resent each other. I think that's just something that's baked into society and will always be there. Now, in terms of my old culture, going back to America, there's so many chill things I love about America that Japan just straight up lacks. I also think Japan has some major transportation problems that need to be seriously addressed. They put too many toll booths on the roads that make car travel between cities difficult. And of course, that's because everyone usually uses trains, but the trains have a problem too, and that's that they stop running at 10 p.m. So, like, I guess the main way to get between cities at night is buses, but I don't know. I definitely had some major problems getting stuck at a few train stations because the trains would stop running at 10 and I would just be stranded like miles away from my apartment. And then I would have to like weigh the options between staying at a business hotel or taking a cab home. And usually 9 out of 10 times, the business hotel ended up being the cheaper option than getting a cab almost every time. And then I would just take the train home in the morning. But like then like one time like it happened and I was completely out of money and I just said fuck it, and I walked home for 4 hours through a nematode infested swamp. Question 10, how do you deal with burnout? I'm pretty sure I'm burned out now, which is why I'm making this video. I've been playing a lot of video games lately and I've been working a lot, and I also really want to work on my anime more, but I don't feel like I can without like backup. So I don't know. In general, the best ways to deal with burnout are just swimming or sleeping if you can swim somewhere. Number 11, what keeps you going when you don't want to get out of bed in the morning? Ugh. Okay. I have definitely been feeling this a lot more lately, and as I've become an adult, I guess nowadays I have more people depending on me than before, so unless I'm violently ill, I usually will get forced out of bed by some kind of problem happening and someone needing my help. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy being asleep, but if I have stuff to do, I'll do the stuff and then I'll go back to sleep eventually. Question 12, how does your time zone affect you? All right, so right now I'm in New York. New York and Japan have completely opposite time zones of each other, and this is completely advantageous of me for my work. Because back when I was working on the anime, we could keep things moving at a really swift pace by timing everyone's schedules out perfectly so that one person finished, it got handed off to the next person. That way, a cut could be started in Japan, that would be worked on all day in Japan, and then it would be forwarded back to me in New York, and I could finish that cut, and the whole thing would be done in like a 16-hour time block. Now, I also sometimes collab with people in LA on the regular. They're about 3 hours behind me, which isn't too bad unless they try to hit me up in the middle of the night when I'm already asleep. Sometimes people in LA will hit me up so late that it will already be morning in New York. I do tend to not usually work with Europeans though because of time zone issues. Like the day in Europe is my early morning / night in the US. I'm also not sure if I'll ever go back to Europe. I've only visited once on vacation and I don't see myself ever going back again unless there is some kind of work emergency. Number 13, are there any Western items you had no option but to import because they were just not available in Japan? Yes, actually, that actually happened a lot. The main thing I was importing was mostly computer and camera equipment and gear. Like there was Yadabashi camera in Shinjuku, but even though there was stuff I could get in Japan, usually it would be localized for Japan. So usually it would make more sense for me to import something cheap from America. And usually the prices would be less expensive, even with the importing costs, compared to just flat out buying the Japanese version instantly. Unless I could find it used. You can find amazing used shit in Japan because people take such good care of their stuff there. Also, some equipment in Japan would be region locked for Japan. Like for example, I brought my PS3 with me to Asia because it doubled as a US region Blu-ray DVD player. But I could still play local PS3 games because the PS3 wasn't region locked for games. However, region locks were one of the reasons I never bought a 3DS in Japan. Like quick backstory on that, the 3DS came out in Japan like a year before it came out in the US, and it came out in Japan while I was living there. And that was really cool because I played the 3DS before like literally any of my friends did. And I was like the first person like seeing it and seeing the holograms, and I was blown away at the time. And that was really cool. But at the same time, when the 3DS launched in Japan, its launch lineup was horrendous. And on top of that, because I knew it had a region lock, I did my hardest to hold off, and I eventually never got a Japanese 3DS. Like, I kind of wanted the Gundam game for 3DS. I thought that looked really cool, but overall, it just wasn't worth it. Number 14, what is the biggest change Japan had on you as a person? I don't know, man. Japan really kicked my ass, and Korea kind of traumatized me. They're both amazing countries to visit, and I think living in them throughout my 20s really strengthened me as a person. And I think I learned a lot of cooking skills in Korea just because the food there was so alien compared to Western food. But on the other hand, Japan, I don't know. In Japan, I just did a lot of deep thinking. I considered a lot about like the passage of society and the movement of time and shit like that. I don't know. I got very existential in Japan. 15. Right now, would you ever consider moving somewhere else? Right now, today, I absolutely can't consider moving. I'm extremely stuck in my current situation, barring a world war breaking out or some other massive personal tragedy. Now, it's possible that if major world events like that do go down, I could maybe see myself moving back to California. Part of me does also want to move back to Asia, but I honestly can't see it ever happening with the way things are. The last place I almost moved to was Seattle, but that didn't happen either, and maybe that's just for the best. 16. People always praise Japanese food in Japan, but what's non-Japanese food like in Japan? Are restaurants run by foreigners and immigrants a common thing? All right, so this is a really tough question, but I have some really tough answers here. Now, overall, a majority of Japanese food is excellent. It's some of the finest food in the world, finest food I definitely ever had. But I have considered this question for a while, and I did ultimately conclude that the best place in the world for food is New York. New York has the finest and widest variety of consistently good food in the widest variety of categories. Now back to Japan, here's what goes on in terms of non-Japanese food in Japan. You have the occasional restaurant run by long-term immigrants who live in Japan. And then you also have the occasional restaurant owned by a Japanese chef who studied overseas, usually in France or America or some other country. And then he came back to Japan with his own unique take on that country's food. Now, I never really saw too much Chinese food in Japan. It was kind of localized to Chinatown, but I did see a lot of Korean, Vietnamese, and Thai food all over Tokyo. I got really excellent Thai food regularly in Shinjuku. There were also several Indian restaurants in the area I would visit frequently, especially as the situation with Fukushima got worse. As the situation with Fukushima got worse, I became really aware that the rice in Japan was kind of contaminated with like nuclear residue. So I would frequent like Indian restaurants because I knew they were using non-Japanese food sources. And I was just trying to not eat radioactive waste as much as possible. And I'm also going to quick mention this place I used to love going to called the Asian Palm. The Asian Palm is this Thai Indian fusion restaurant in Shinjuku. And this was my number one go-to place in Japan for breakfast. Because I don't know if you know this, but Japan really doesn't have breakfast. Like in Japan, all they eat for breakfast is like an onigiri and then they run off to work. So it is incredibly difficult to get a decent breakfast in Japan. And being an American, I love breakfast. So anyway, back to the Asian Palm. At the Asian Palm, they would have this really weird breakfast that was essentially like a fruit buffet. And they would always give me like this fruit pudding stuff. And I have no idea what was into it, but I love that shit. Like that was one of my favorite foods that I don't know what it was and I can never have it again. But that was like one of my mainstays in my final days in Japan. Like, I don't know what this food was. I would describe it as like fruit salad, but like inside of gelatin, like with pudding on top. It was so majorly good. I'm not sure if it was a Thai food, an Indian food, or Japanese food. It kind of resembles some of the other desserts I would see across Japan. So that makes me think it was just some weird ultra fusion fruit pudding parfait thing. But yeah, that was a great breakfast. Now back to the main question. It's extremely hard to get Western food in Japan. Like just going over the basics, Italian food. I could not find a single decent Italian restaurant in all of Asia that didn't take too many liabilities with the recipes or have major problems with the cost and portion size that just offended me as an American who grew up on spaghetti. Like it was so out of whack. Like I remember there were places in Tokyo that would pretty much charge you like $20 for what I would consider just like a fork full of spaghetti. And as a result of that, I became hyper reliant on cooking my own Italian food, which impressed the ladies. Now, also Mexican food was impossible to get in Japan. Like, I saw a single Mexican restaurant in Shibuya, and it was the exact same story as the Italian. Even though they knew the recipes, it was just so out of whack because the ingredients were completely wrong. Like, I feel like instead of tortillas, they were using like pitas and like, I don't know. I did have really excellent Spanish food in like Kyoto. And in terms of American food, I will say by and large, you can get really good American food in Japan. Like, Japanese McDonald's and Japanese Burger Kings are amazing. They put their American counterparts to shame. And if you ever visit, you definitely need to try them both at least once. Yeah, it's not super hard to find decent American food in Japan. And it's not super hard to find decent Asian food in Japan. But if you're trying to get like European food or any kind of like Latin food, it's difficult. Question 17. What was the most wild night you ever had in Japan? Okay, without a doubt, the most wild night I ever had in Japan, and perhaps in my entire life, was during my first week in Japan and the first day I went to Osaka. So during my first week in Japan, I had this really interesting charisma effect going on where I kept going out at night and gathering up small crowds of random helpful people to like hang out with and like talk to. And in Osaka, I teamed up with a super random group of really cool hippies who were interested in America, and they took me out for dinner and we bar hopped and we went to a bunch of cool places and we had an amazing time. Also, I'm leaving out a majority of the story, but a really crazy thing that happened during this trip was they had also told me that Quentin Tarantino had just died, which confused the shit out of me. And so that whole day, like as we were bar hopping, I was also trying to like mourn the death of Quentin Tarantino. Now, I later figured out what had happened was that his editor had died and not him, but the hippies had gotten the story wrong and told me wrong. But it was still a really freaky day. And yeah, that was amazing. They showed me where to get the best sushi in Sonnenbori, and my God, was that ever good. Biggest sushi I ever saw in my life. Question 18. Since you've gone to LA a lot this year, what would you say is the best thing about LA that you wish you could experience in Japan? All right, LA has the most absolute best phenomenal party scene in the world. LA is just the best party town on the earth. On top of that, all the parties in LA are mini networking opportunities where one good party can lead you to either a successful job or at the very least, hopefully fame and fortune. Now, I really wish Japan had more of that nightlife scene and more of that open opportunity that LA has. If it did, I would definitely visit Japan more often. Now, on the flip side though, Japan is the cleanest place in the world, and I would argue that LA is the dirtiest. So consider that. 19. What was the hardest part of getting used to living in Japan? I don't know. In general, people in Japan are really inflexible, and every once in a while you'll try to do something and people will just railroad you, and it makes things mega difficult. The movie Ikiru is kind of about this. It's really like sums it up so shockingly well that it's always been this way and it's always fucked people over. Like, for example, it was so hard for me to get a cell phone. I literally spent 6 months trying to figure out. And then the day it came for me to finally get a phone, I actually had 2 people trying to help me get one. And it still took us the whole day to get me the phone. We literally spent the entire day trying to figure out all these contract loopholes and negotiating with like SoftBank to get me the phone and just to get me the phone. And eventually we did get me the phone, but it was so hard to get SoftBank to agree to give me a phone as a foreigner. Like, I felt like in a lot of ways, people were just being random and cruel to me and making things extra difficult when it didn't need to be that difficult, just because they were not being flexible about rules that didn't make sense. Number 20, apart from the language barrier, what is the most difficult thing to overcome when socializing with the locals? Well, I speak enough Japanese that for me, socializing was fine. The biggest problem for me in Japan was just being overwhelmed with the numerous things going on. And at a certain point, I don't know, there was just a lot going on in Japan that like could stress me out on like a day-to-day basis. Okay, the last question, question 21. I'm visiting Japan next year. Should I look into hotels or Airbnbs? Okay, so Japan is really flexible in that, and you should definitely be able to find a hotel with no problem. In fact, I'm so confident of that, I would say just show up in Japan and find a hotel. There's so many hotels in Japan that I've traveled to, and if you show up on the spot, you can haggle them down for a cheaper price. At least in situations where I was able to usually negotiate with the hotel owner and usually get like $10 or $20 off on the price of my room by haggling. Being able to speak Japanese is critical for that, though. If you can't speak Japanese, you won't be able to haggle, and you might even get taken advantage of. But anyway, in the end, renting a hotel is pretty much a business transaction. So you should expect a decent hotel to run you from between $30 to $70 a night, depending on how far away you are from a major city. The closer you are, the more expensive it's going to be. But on the flip side, some of the absolute best experiences I've ever had have been in fanciest hotels in the middle of nowhere in Asia. So yeah, I mean, no matter where you land in a hotel in Asia, you're usually going to have a good time. I've also had a lot of decent experiences in hostels, meeting like random groups of people and like partying with them. I would recommend that if you're in your 20s and you're down for some fun whateverness. But if you're older or just like not down for that, just go to a hotel. Now, I don't know if there are Airbnbs in Japan, so I'm not sure how doable that is. I would just straight up recommend against it because of the wide variety of available hotels and how cheap they are. Okay, wow. Answering all those questions made this video last a whole half hour. Wow, that's cool. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed my questions about life in Japan, and that's also what's going on with my anime. All right, leave a comment if you have any follow-up questions on my answers and what you think I should do. All right, thanks, guys.